Hi everyone, and welcome to this video which is going to be looking at writing language essays. This video is aimed at the Language Studies unit. This video is going to be in two parts. And in the first part, we're going to be talking about how to structure an essay. And then if you join us again in the second part of the video, we're going to be talking about tips for making your essay even better. So let's just look at the lesson plan for today's lesson. Firstly, we're going to be looking at how to structure an essay. So structure is something that's really important, but it can be quite difficult if you don't know how to do it. So we're just going to go over the tips and the methods for getting that right. Secondly, we'll be looking at some important points of style to ensure a sophisticated essay. So style is another really important layer in your essay, and we'll be looking at some little tips in order to make sure you stand out to the marker. Thirdly, we're going to be looking at ensuring that you make sure you answer the question through your response. So sometimes when you write essays, they're good, but they don't answer the question. So we're going to be looking at some tips for getting that right. So let's start by looking at what makes a language essay different. Now you've come to the end of basically your studies in the Language Studies unit. You've really had a look at the content, but now you need to move forward into structuring that into an essay. And that's what this video is going to help you do. Language essays should be more specific about language techniques than regular essays. So what you can actually do is look back to one of our previous videos, which is where we went through a glossary of language techniques. So this essay isn't just about a normal essay, so not just about, analyzing themes and characters. It's specifically about language. So if you need a bit of a refresher, look back to that earlier video. So let's look at structuring an essay. Structure your ideas so they're easily accessible and understandable to your marker. This is something that's really important to remember. When you're writing an essay, even if your content's good and it's really informative and interesting, if it's structured badly, it's just going to be confusing and illogical. So if you do this correctly, you're going to be able to guide your reader through your ideas in a logical way. So everything you've written is going to make a lot more sense. Structure will also help you to develop your ideas through the need to categorize. So as you're actually thinking about how you can structure your ideas, that's actually a really good technique for brainstorming, thinking up themes, putting quotes under headings, and really just getting organized in your own mind. So let's take a look at this sample structure. So keep in mind that essays can be structured in lots of different ways. Different students are going to be approaching this from different angles, but this is just one example of how you can do it. So firstly, you've got your introduction. Secondly, you've got your body paragraphs, and this is going to include both your set text and your related text alternating. And the number of these that you include is going to be based on the time limit. And thirdly, we have our conclusion. So what we're going to do now is go through each of these different elements and look at what needs to be in each of those parts. So let's start by looking at the introduction. Now in the introduction, the first thing you have to do is to outline the theme or topic that you're studying. So in this case, you're looking at language studies, and you're really making sure that what you're focusing on is language-based. Secondly, you need to be addressing the question by using a few keywords showing your answer. So this is where you're directly going to the question, underlining some keywords, and then using that in your answer. Just so you're really pointing out to the marker in a very obvious way that, you're taking your answer and making it directly to the question. Thirdly, you need to include the name of the text, and this will also include a bit of extra information. So things like the year it was published in brackets after its name and what genre it is. So you might say the name of the text, the year, and then say, this is a film, or, this is a work of fiction. The fourth thing you're going to do in your introduction is to describe some brief context about the text. So brief is the key word here. You do want to do this, but make sure you don't waste time that you could be spending on analysis by looking at context. So you might just briefly mention who the author was and the sort of things that were influencing them when they wrote the text. Fifthly, you're going to be pointing out your three main interesting uses of language in the text, and that's going to be in order. So remember, this is a language essay. So in your introduction, you're directly linking to language. This is going to be showing that language is relevant to your essay and also is going to be logically outlining your ideas. So by putting them in order, the reader really knows what direction you're taking them in for the rest of the essay. Now we get to the body. So after you've come off your introduction, where you've hopefully really outlined your argument well, you start getting into the flesh of your essay, and that's the body. Now this is going to be at least 3 paragraphs, but again, as we've said before, the number of paragraphs you write is going to be dependent on how fast you can write, how much you can remember, and the time limit of the exam. So you really need to decide for yourself what you think is an appropriate length, but 3 paragraphs is the absolute minimum. So each paragraph should be about a new idea. So make sure that in each paragraph you're looking at a new idea related to the question. You also need to make sure that you leave a line break between paragraphs to make them clear to read. So really just split them up and make it very obvious that this is the end of one paragraph and this is the next. You don't want them to all be blurring into each other. That gets really confusing. Each paragraph should be about one of the points you raised in your introduction. So remember, back to the introduction, we mentioned those 3 key language points in your introduction. This is where you're explaining them one by one. Within that body, you also need to have a bit of a substructure. So by that, each paragraph really has to follow a specific structure. So a good technique to think about this is to imagine that each paragraph is a bit like a part of a hamburger. So if you start, there needs to be a sturdy top and bottom to hold the contents inside. So the top bun is the topic sentence. That's where you're introducing your idea. You're really solidly pointing out to the reader that this is where you're taking this paragraph. The contents of the bun is the techniques. So that's where you're bringing up specific examples from the text, quotes, techniques, things like that. You obviously need to provide a quote as part of that to make sure that you're specifically linking to the text and explain what that technique achieves. So not just stating it, but really showing how that's important and what it proves. Then you get to the bottom bun of the hamburger, and that's where you're making a conclusion about the main idea. So you're really summarizing through that final sentence and linking it back to the question. Remember as well within your paragraphs, and we have talked about this in previous videos, that you should be using the state, explain, and support format. So by that, what I mean is that every paragraph has to do 3 different things. Firstly, you need to state the name of the technique. Secondly, you need to explain how that technique achieves the theme. And thirdly, you need to support that with a quote, which is about 5 words or longer. So those are your 3 aims the whole way through. In language essays, you probably need to repeat steps 2 and 3 a number of times in each paragraph to make sure you're getting enough language analysis out of that. We then get to the conclusion of your essay, and this is where you're really summarizing all of your ideas. But keep in mind that it's not quite that simple, because conclusions don't just repeat what you've already said. They actually show why the argument you just made is important. So why is it meaningful, and how have you proved that argument? They also make the essay logical by outlining the 3 main ideas again, but that's going to be at the end of your conclusion. You also need to make sure you make that meaningful comment. So that brings us to the end of part 1 of this 2-part video on how to write a language essay. If you join us in just a moment in part 2, we'll be continuing by looking at some stylistic features of essays and how you can really improve your essay writing skills.